On a humid Friday night, the kind where the air feels heavy with expectation, a local bar on the edge of town buzzed with music and chatter, laughter carried across sticky floors, glasses clinked under neon lights, and people sought escape from the long week. Nobody noticed at first, when two sisters walked in. They weren't celebrities, weren't dressed to turn heads, but something about them made people look twice. Danielle and Dominique Carter, identical twins, sharp-eyed and self-assured, carried themselves with a confidence that wasn't learned overnight. They found a booth in the corner, ordering simple drinks, content to enjoy each other's company. For them nights like this were rare, a chance to blend in and just be women in their 20s, laughing about old memories, yet blending in wasn't in the cards, because even in a crowded room, some men notice women not to appreciate them but to measure control. And tonight, three men who thought they owned the night spotted the sisters. Rick Dalton was the kind of man whose badge gave him more arrogance than duty. Off duty now, his shirt half unbuttoned, the smell of whiskey clinging to his breath, he strutted through the bar like it was his kingdom. Behind him trailed Mark Stevens, heavy-set, always laughing too loud at cruel jokes, and Kyle Boyd the youngest, eager to mimic the others. They were cops, but not the kind people trusted. They were the kind you avoided, the kind who mistook intimidation for respect. Rick's gaze locked on the twins, and a smirk curved across his face. Fresh faces, he muttered to his buddies. Let's give them a warm welcome. He staggered toward the booth, dragging a chair with a screech that silenced part of the room. Danielle straightened in her seat, her posture sharp without being defensive. Dominique folded her hands on the table, her dark eyes calm but unyielding. Back off, Danielle said when Rick leaned too close, his shadow blotting out the neon glow. Her voice was steady, firm, and not a plea but a warning, that only amused him more. Or what, sweetheart? Rick mocked, pulling the chair backward and straddling it like he was staking claim to the space. His buddies circled the table like sharks, Mark resting his hands heavily on Dominique's chair, Kyle slurring crude compliments with a drunken grin. The room shifted uneasily, some patrons averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. A woman grabbed her purse and slipped out. The bartender Luis froze with a rag in his hand, his jaw tight, torn between stepping in and knowing what happened to those who crossed local cops. Dominique's voice sliced through the tension. Don't touch me. She didn't raise it, didn't need to. The weight in her tone carried authority. Mark laughed, squeezing her shoulders. What you gonna call the police? The irony dripped, and all three burst into laughter, enjoying the private joke that only they found funny. Rick leaned closer to Danielle, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath. Here's what's going to happen. You're gonna smile, buy us a drink, maybe even thank us for gracing your table, or we'll find another way to make this interesting. Danielle took a deliberate sip of her drink, then set it down with a click. Here's what's really going to happen. You're going to step away from this table before you make the biggest mistake of your life. A flicker of something crossed Rick's face. Not fear, not yet. Annoyance maybe, the kind of irritation bullies feel when prey doesn't break. He gestured to Kyle, who swayed dangerously on his feet. Hear that? She's threatening officers. Sure did, Sarge, Kyle said, fumbling with his cuffs, the metallic click echoing across the bar. The atmosphere turned heavier, patrons shrinking into their seats. The music had long since faded into background noise, leaving only the sound of boots scraping against the floor, laughter sharp enough to cut, and the quiet strength of two women who refused to cower. Dominique's jaw tightened as Mark's hand slid from her shoulders toward her arm. She shifted slightly, her expression calm, but her body coiled like a spring. Rick dragged his chair closer, his knees nearly touching Danielle's. You think you're in charge here? Rick sneered, eyes narrowing. This is my town, my rules. For a moment silence held the bar in a chokehold, and then the sound of a phone camera clicking broke it. A young man at a nearby table, too brave for his own safety, raised his phone discreetly. Kyle lunged toward him, but Rick's whistle stopped him cold. Later, Rick muttered, we'll deal with him later. All eyes returned to the sisters, boxed in on three sides, the tension crackling like a storm about to break. Dominique and Danielle exchanged a look, one of those unspoken conversations only twins could have. Years of shared battles had forged an unshakable bond, one that told them when to move, when to hold, when to strike. And now they waited, because the mistake had already been made. The officers thought they were cornering prey. They hadn't realized yet that they were pressing against predators, women who had been trained for darker, harder nights than this. The Carter sisters were FBI agents, and before the night was over, everyone would know it. The handcuffs snapped open in Kyle's hand with a metallic clink that echoed across the bar. He twirled them like a toy, enjoying the sight of nervous glances darting around the room. Rick smirked, leaning in closer to Danielle. Looks like we've got ourselves a couple of troublemakers. Disorderly conduct threatening officers, might need to haul you downtown. Danielle didn't flinch, she leaned forward just enough to meet his bloodshot eyes, her voice calm, each syllable cutting the air. Last chance, walk away. Rick chuckled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. The laughter of a man who thought he still controlled the board, not realizing he was already in checkmate. You've got a mouth on you, let's see how tough you are in cuffs. He snapped his fingers. Mark tightened his grip on Dominique, yanking her up roughly. Chairs scraped, drinks spilled. Luis the bartender finally moved. He set down his tray of glasses and stepped forward, voice firm though his hands trembled. That's enough, Sergeant, not in my bar. Rick's head snapped toward him. Go back to washing dishes, Luis, before I decide to check your papers again. The venom in his tone dripped with the promise of consequences. Luis froze, his fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing more. Dominique's voice broke the silence, low, precise, a razor in velvet. You don't want to do this. Mark laughed, shoving her toward the table. And why not? The sisters shared another glance, silent strategy flashing between them like electricity. Danielle inhaled deeply, her spine straightening, her hand brushing the purse at her side. Not yet. Timing mattered more than anger. Rick grabbed the empty chair again, spinning it backward and sitting close enough that his knees touched Danielle's. This is my town, my bar, my rules. He gestured at his men. And rule number 1, you don't talk back to cops. Patrons stared into their drinks. A couple slipped out quietly. The music had stopped altogether, leaving only the heavy thump of hearts, and the sharp crack of Rick's chair legs against the wood floor. Kyle leaned toward Dominique, his words slurred but heavy with menace. Pretty little thing like you, dressed like that, you're basically asking for attention. His hands mimicked an exaggerated hourglass, earning a laugh from Mark. Dominique's face hardened, stone carved by years of endurance. She'd seen men like this before, men who mistook cruelty for power. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed silent, her patience forged by training. Rick smirked. Here's the deal, you two apologize. You buy us a round of drinks, maybe if you're real nice, we forget about your disrespect. Or his voice dropped lower, darker, we take you downtown and let the night get interesting. Danielle tilted her glass, took one slow sip, then placed it back on the table with deliberate precision. Here's what's really going to happen. You're going to remove your hands from my sister, you're going to step back, and you're going to leave this bar. Because if you don't, you'll regret it. Rick's smile stretched wider, he leaned closer, his breath hot with whiskey. That sounded like a threat. He looked back at his men. Did you boys hear a threat? Sure did, Sarge, Kyle said eagerly. Definitely threatening an officer, Mark agreed, tightening his grip on Dominique. The circle closed tighter, the air inside the bar felt suffocating, heavy with expectation. Every eye watched, though most tried to appear as if they weren't. Nobody wanted to intervene, but nobody could look away. Danielle's hand hovered over her purse again. Rick noticed, his grin predatory. Got something in there, a little pepper spray, maybe a toy gun. Go ahead, princess, show me what you've got. Danielle's reply was smooth, almost mocking. Just lipstick, but I doubt it's your shade. Laughter from the officers filled the bar, ugly and cruel. Rick's smirk widened. Cute, real cute, but playtime's over. In one swift motion, he grabbed Danielle's wrist, twisting it hard enough to make onlookers gasp. At the same time, Mark shoved Dominique against the table, his forearm pressing across her shoulders. Kyle, grinning like a child at a fair, snapped the cuffs open wider. The Carter sisters didn't resist. Not yet. They exchanged another look, calm eyes in the middle of chaos. Dominique's lips barely moved, but Danielle understood the silent message. Wait. Rick dragged Danielle to her feet, forcing her toward the center of the bar. Kyle stumbled after, cuffs ready. Dominique was shoved beside her, Mark's heavy hand clamped on her arm. The sisters stood shoulder to shoulder, bound not by cuffs yet, but by the steady rhythm of shared resolve. Rick raised his voice, making a show of it. See, this is what happens when you disrespect authority. He tugged Danielle's arm higher, her drink spilling across the floor. "Ladies, meet your lesson." The humiliation was deliberate, the performance staged for every set of watching eyes, and yet beneath the cruelty, beneath the alcohol-fueled bravado, none of the officers realized they were pushing two women who had spent years in the shadows of danger, women who had trained their bodies and minds to withstand more than drunken threats in a bar. Danielle's voice cut through the noise, calm, cold, certain. "You're making a very big mistake." Rick laughed, but the sound cracked under its own weight. He jerked his head toward the door. "Let's take them downtown, teach them a little respect." And just like that, the sisters were marched through the bar, past silent patrons who parted like water, past Luis whose jaw was clenched with helpless fury, past windows that reflected their composed faces even as hands gripped their arms. The night air hit like a slap, humid, heavy, unforgiving. A patrol car waited under the harsh glow of a flickering streetlight. Danielle stumbled deliberately, her shoulder brushing Dominique's. Their eyes locked once more. Dominique whispered so low it was almost lost to the sound of crickets. "They have no idea." Danielle's reply was sharper, like the click of a lock turning. "Not yet." The patrol car's headlights cut across the cracked asphalt, the engine idling like a growl in the night. Rick shoved Danielle toward the back seat, mocking her stumble. "Careful now, wouldn't want you hurting yourself before we get to the station." His men laughed, cruel and careless. Dominique caught her balance, straightened and fixed him with a steady gaze. "This isn't going to end the way you think." Rick's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, but arrogance covered it quickly. "Sweetheart, it's already ended. You just don't know it yet." They were forced into the car, cuffs biting into their wrists, shoulders pressed tight in the back seat. The city lights blurred as the vehicle pulled away, street after street passing in silence, except for the officers' drunken banter up front. Danielle leaned closer to her sister, whispering so softly the partition nearly swallowed the words. "They're digging their own graves." Dominique's lips barely moved. "We need witnesses, we need timing." The car rolled into the station, its buzzing fluorescent lights casting everything in sterile gray. The booking desk was manned by a bored officer, who didn't look up from his crossword as Rick and his crew dragged the sisters forward. The cuffs clanged against the desk, the sound sharp and final. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, assaulting officers." Rick rattled off like he was reciting a grocery list. He pushed the paperwork across the desk with a smirk. "Another couple of troublemakers." Danielle said nothing. Dominique kept her chin high, her silence louder than any protest. They were shoved into holding cells, separated by iron bars but close enough to exchange glances. Around them the station hummed with quiet menace. Every officer who walked past either smirked or avoided eye contact entirely. Corruption clung to the air like smoke. Hours crawled by. The sisters sat in stillness, pretending defeat while their minds catalogued every detail, faces, names, conversations. Their training was second nature: observe, record, wait. Then came the chief. Silver hair, crisp uniform, eyes that carried decades of practiced intimidation. Chief Holt. He walked slowly, deliberately, his shoes clicking against the floor, as if marking the rhythm of his power. "Well," he said softly, almost kindly, "I hear we have some federal agents making trouble in my town." Danielle and Dominique's eyes locked onto his. His words hung heavy, like smoke after a fire. He knew. Dominique stepped forward. "Your officers assaulted us, arrested us without cause, falsified charges." The chief's smile was small, cold and unchanging. "Is that so? Funny thing about charges, they're whatever we write them to be. Disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, resisting. Who's going to question it? A couple of women in cuffs." He leaned closer to Danielle's cell, lowering his voice. "Even FBI badges can't protect you here." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rick and his men leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, enjoying the show. The system was theirs. The town was theirs. Justice bent under their weight. But what they didn't know was that justice sometimes waits in silence. As dawn approached, a young officer named Morales slid trays of bland food into the cells. Her hands trembled as she set them down, her voice loud enough for the others to hear. "Breakfast, standard issue." Then softer just for them. "You're not the first, they do this often. I'll help you." Her eyes darted nervously toward the others then away. A folded scrap of paper slipped under the tray, an emergency FBI contact, proof that not everyone inside the walls was corrupt. Danielle palmed the note, hiding it beneath the blanket. Dominique gave Morales the smallest of nods, an ally in the dark. Hours later Rick and his men returned, swaggering, laughing, bourbon on their breath. They taunted, shoved, whispered threats about what would happen next. They thought the sisters were broken, beaten down, silent. But silence wasn't weakness, silence was patience. When Rick leaned too close to the bars, smirking at Dominique, she let her badge case slide from her back pocket. It hit the concrete floor with a heavy thud, flipping open under the harsh fluorescent light. The golden shield glinted unmistakably, the 3 letters carved deep FBI. The room froze, every sound seemed to vanish. Even Rick's grin faltered as his eyes flicked to the badge. Patrons might lie, bystanders might disappear, but a federal badge was harder to erase. "You're assaulting federal agents," Danielle said, her voice calm and unshakable. She stepped forward, her chin lifted high. "Every word, every touch, every fabricated charge, it's all federal now." The chief's eyes narrowed, the calm mask slipping for just an instant. Rick tried to laugh, tried to kick the badge across the floor like it meant nothing. But the weight of it lingered in the air. Phones appeared, even in the shadows, people were recording. The bartenders recording. Morales whispered promises, witnesses who could no longer deny what they'd seen. Dominique's voice rang out, low but steady. "This is your last chance to walk away." Rick's smirk cracked, he sneered but his voice had lost its swagger. "You think that little piece of metal will save you?" Danielle's reply was sharp as steel. "It's not the badge that saves us. It's the truth, and the truth always comes out." For the first time all night it wasn't the sisters who looked cornered. It was the men who had built their lives on intimidation, suddenly facing a power that didn't bow to their rules. The sisters stood side by side, bruised but unbroken, their presence filling the cell block with something stronger than fear. It wasn't just defiance, it was a promise. Justice was coming, and for once it wouldn't be delayed.